Nobody warns you that you can fall in love with someone who feels completely right and still be walking toward the wrong future. I didn't learn that lesson in one big cinematic moment. There wasn't a slammed door, no dramatic confession, no photograph falling out of a drawer. It came slowly, one detail at a time. Small things I noticed and then explained away because, at 35 years old, I was happier than I'd been in a very long time. Her name was Megan, and for 14 months, I honestly believed I'd found the woman I was going to spend the rest of my life with. But let me back up. My name is Nikolaos Papadimitriou. Everybody who actually knows me calls me Nico. I run a commercial real estate company in Metro Detroit. Our office is in Birmingham, Michigan, right in Oakland County. The business started with my father, Stavros. He built it in the 80s with almost nothing. No inheritance, no investors waiting with checks. Just long hours, borrowed money, stubbornness, and the kind of immigrant work ethic that makes retirement sound vaguely suspicious. I joined him when I was 26. Together, we expanded the company. More properties, more commercial projects, better deals. Eventually, we became the kind of family my grandfather probably never imagined when he first came to America. But money was never the center of our house. Family was. Always. We're Greek-American. 3 generations in Metro Detroit. And if you know Greek families, you already know there are certain rules nobody actually writes down. My parents still live in Grosse Pointe in the same house they bought after getting married. Sunday dinner is not optional. You can have a fever, a deadline, a business emergency, possibly a minor natural disaster. My mother will still ask what time you're arriving. Her name is Eleni. Every Sunday she makes spanakopita from scratch. She's been doing it longer than I've been alive. And if you eat only one piece, she'll look at you like you've announced plans to leave the family. Then there's my Uncle Theo. Theo lives about 15 minutes away. He has never once required an invitation to enter my parents' house. I'm not sure he even understands the concept. Our family is loud. We're affectionate. We argue at full volume and then pass each other potatoes 30 seconds later. There is no halfway with us, which is why what happened with Megan surprised even me. I met her at a charity event in Birmingham. Within 3 months, I was finished. Completely gone. That isn't normal for me. I don't fall in love quickly. I'd had 2 serious relationships before Megan. Both ended peacefully. No betrayal. No screaming. Just 2 people eventually recognizing that they wanted different versions of life. Then Megan walked into that fundraiser. Black dress. Confident. Polished. The sort of woman who somehow looked perfectly comfortable in a room full of donors, executives, lawyers, and people pretending not to compare watches. Within 5 minutes, she had laughed at one of Uncle Theo's terrible jokes about Greek yogurt. That alone probably earned her provisional citizenship in our family. Then she tasted something my mother had brought for the appetizer table. Instead of saying the usual polite, "This is delicious," Megan turned to her and asked how she'd made it. Really asked. Ingredients. Technique. What kind of cheese. How long it baked. My mother grabbed her by the arm. 45 minutes later, they were still talking. I stood across the room watching them, and I remember thinking, so this is what people mean. This is how it happens. Megan didn't have to force herself into my family. She just fit. We dated 14 months. By the 2nd month, she was already coming to Sunday dinner. By month 4, she knew never to sit in Uncle Theo's chair. Nobody had actually told her that was his chair. She simply understood after watching him stand beside it one Sunday, looking personally betrayed until my cousin moved. My parents adored her. My mother fed her like she was trying to correct 30 years of nutritional neglect. My father liked that Megan could talk business without turning every conversation into business. Theo liked everybody who laughed at Theo. So yes, she fit, and I loved her. I proposed on the rooftop of the Shinola Hotel in downtown Detroit. Late spring, Tuesday evening. Flowers, a ring, city lights, the whole embarrassing production. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say. Megan didn't even let me finish. She said yes. My mother cried when I called. My father gave me the most Greek father response imaginable. Good. A pause. Now bring her sundae, so your mother can feed her. Theo somehow already knew. I still don't know how. There are government intelligence agencies with worse information networks than Uncle Theo. I was happy, not cautiously happy, not waiting for the other shoe happy, completely happy, and I had no idea what Megan had been keeping from me. That's important, because I don't want to rewrite her into some obvious villain from the beginning. She wasn't cold. She wasn't manipulative in some cartoonish way. She was funny, warm, thoughtful. When I was with Megan, she made me feel like life had finally settled into the shape it was supposed to have. That's why the first conversation about her parents didn't alarm me. It made me feel sorry for her. We'd been dating maybe 6 weeks. We were at her apartment in Midtown. Takeout containers were spread across the coffee table. Some television series was playing behind us. Neither one of us was paying attention. We started talking about families. With me, that happens early. Eventually, I asked about hers. Megan went quiet. Then she said, "My parents and I don't really have a relationship." I waited. They were difficult growing up. What kind of difficult? She looked down for a second. Controlling. Then, critical. Another pause. My father especially. There wasn't melodrama in her voice. That almost made it more believable. She sounded like somebody describing an old injury. Not bleeding anymore. Still there. I had to create distance from them. How much distance? A lot. She looked at me. I even changed the last name I use online because I needed space. I remember feeling protective of her. Not suspicious. "I'm sorry." She gave me a small smile. "It's okay." Then she said, "They're not going to be at our wedding someday." We weren't engaged yet, but we were already talking like that. I took her hand. "If that's what you need, I'm okay with it." She searched my face. "Really? Really?" And I meant it. Why wouldn't I? At that point, Megan had given me no reason to question her. The issue wasn't me. The issue was my family. Because Papadimitrius have a specific understanding of family that probably requires its own anthropology department. We need to know people, not because we're trying to interrogate them, not because bloodlines matter. It's simpler than that. We believe knowing somebody's family tells you something about the person. Who raised you? What did dinner look like in your house? Who did you call when something went wrong? Who taught you how to argue? Who taught you how to apologize? Where did you come from? Those questions matter to us. So as the wedding got closer, the empty space where Megan's family should have been became harder to ignore. By the 11th month of our engagement, nobody was openly challenging her story. But the silence itself had started becoming noticeable. And naturally, the person who finally said something was Uncle Theo. It happened during Sunday dinner in late July. My mother had made pasticcio, the real thing, not something you throw together on a weeknight. This was the version that occupied half of Saturday and required my father to stay out of the kitchen for his own safety. We were all sitting around the table. My parents, me, Megan, Theo, my cousin Nick and his wife. Everything was normal. Then Theo put his fork down. "Megan." She looked at him. "Yes? I gotta ask you something." My father looked at Theo immediately. That alone should have stopped him. Nothing stops Theo. Megan smiled. "Okay." Theo leaned forward. "Where are your people?" Silence. Absolute silence. There are sentences that don't just enter a conversation. They sit down in the middle of the table. That was one of them. Megan's smile stayed in place. Her eyes didn't. "My parents and I don't speak." "I know." Theo nodded. "You've told us that." She waited. "I'm asking where they are." My father gave him a warning. "Theo," just his name. Low voice, meaning stop. Theo picked up his fork again, but too late. The question was already there, and no amount of food was going to make everybody forget it. Megan handled it well, better than I did. She repeated that her childhood had been difficult, that keeping distance was necessary. My mother immediately changed the subject. Dinner kept moving. But afterward, after Megan had left, My father found me alone in the kitchen. He poured himself a little wine. Then he leaned against the counter. "She's a good woman." It wasn't a question. "She is. I believe you." He took a sip. Then, "But Nico." I knew that tone. "What?" "We're going to stand in church. Pope, hear me." I stopped. "We're going to stand in front of God." He continued. "Our family, our friends, everybody. And we're going to watch you make promises to this woman without knowing one person from where she came from. Her parents are toxic. I heard you. She had a rough childhood. I heard that too. Then what's the problem?" My father set his glass down. "I believe her." That surprised me. He continued. "I'm not telling you to bring them to the wedding. I'm not telling you to fix her family. I'm not telling you she's lying. Then what are you telling me?" He looked directly at me. "Bad parents don't disappear because their daughter stops calling them." I didn't answer. "They live somewhere." He tapped the counter once with his finger. "They have names, addresses, a history." He paused. "You are about to marry someone. You should know what you're marrying into." That line stayed with me. Not because it made me suddenly suspicious of Megan. It didn't. That's the strange part. I still believed her. Completely. If anything, my anxiety went in the opposite direction. What if I found Megan's parents and they hated me? That was the fear I drove home with that night. Not conspiracy. Not deception. Rejection. Megan belonged to a world that occasionally made me feel rough around the edges. Corporate marketing. Downtown Detroit. MBA friends. Restaurants where the wine list required research. Her apartment looked like somebody had styled it for a magazine shoot. Her friends casually wore brands I'd never heard of and apparently should have. Megan herself had a certain polish. I loved it about her. But sometimes, quietly, I wondered if I was too much. Too loud, too ethnic, too attached to family, too likely to bring Uncle Theo somewhere formal. What if her parents were even more refined than Megan? What if they had expectations? Old money, country clubs, the kind of people who heard commercial real estate and still somehow thought, "That's nice." What if they met me and decided I wasn't the man they'd imagined for their daughter? And worse, what if Megan saw me differently after watching them judge me? That was my real fear. So when I got onto I-75 the following Saturday morning, driving north, I wasn't thinking, "I'm about to expose a lie." I was thinking, "I'm about to meet two intimidating people and convince them I'm good enough for their daughter." I genuinely believed I was the underdog. That's almost funny now. Finding them hadn't even required hiring an investigator. No databases, no surveillance, no dramatic detective work, just paperwork. Megan had moved into one of the downtown condos owned and managed by my company. With the wedding approaching, our legal department needed her added formally to the master lease for tax and corporate purposes. Routine administrative stuff, the sort of paperwork nobody remembers 5 minutes after signing. I was sitting in my office on a Friday afternoon when my office manager dropped the processed documents on my desk. I barely looked at him at first. Then, something on one page caught my attention, and for the first time since I'd met Megan, a small piece of her story stopped fitting. I looked down at the identification attached to the lease paperwork. For a few seconds, I thought I was reading it wrong. Megan Melissa Bennett. Not Ashford. Bennett. I stared at the screen. Ashford was the name she used online. The name she introduced herself with professionally. The name all my friends knew. But according to the state-issued ID sitting in front of me, Megan Ashford did not legally exist, at least not in the way I'd understood her. I told myself there could be a simple explanation. People use middle names. People change names socially. People distance themselves from family. None of that automatically meant anything. Still, curiosity had already taken over. I opened a public property database, typed in Megan Bennett. A few clicks later, I found an old address. Maple Avenue, Saginaw, Michigan. Then an abandoned Facebook profile, old enough that the photographs still had the slightly washed-out look of early social media. College pictures, birthday posts, family photos, and there it was again. Bennett. The address was about an hour and 40 minutes north. The next morning, I told Megan I had to inspect a property. She barely looked away from her laptop. On a Saturday? Tenant issue. She leaned over and kissed me. Drive safe. That was it. No nervousness. No hesitation. Nothing. The entire drive north I rehearsed introductions. Note accusation. Introduction. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. My name is Nico Papadimitriou. I'm marrying your daughter. I know this is unusual. I know Megan hasn't spoken to you. I'm not here to interfere. I just wanted to meet you. Every version sounded worse than the one before it. By the time I exited I-75, I had convinced myself I was about to knock on the door of two sophisticated, intimidating people who would immediately decide their daughter could have done better. Then I turned onto Maple Avenue, and everything I'd imagined started falling apart. The neighborhood was ordinary. Not bad. Not wealthy. Just normal. Single-story houses. Trimmed lawns. Flags hanging from porches. A couple of bicycles lying in one driveway. The kind of street where people probably knew whose garbage can belong to which house. I found the number, then slowed almost to a stop. The Bennett house was a well-maintained ranch. Flower beds along the walkway. Wind chimes hanging from the porch. A faded Detroit Tigers banner near the garage. And standing in the yard with a garden hose was an older man in jeans and a Tigers t-shirt. Reading glasses rested on top of his head. He was watering flowers with the relaxed concentration of somebody who had absolutely nowhere else he needed to be. I didn't get out immediately. I sat there, 5 minutes, maybe more, because this wasn't the picture Megan had painted. No gates, no luxury SUV, no stone columns, no sense of status. Nothing about that house said cold, controlling, image-obsessed parents. It said suburban Michigan, and for one brief moment, I felt relieved. Maybe I'd been right to worry about nothing. Maybe these were simply ordinary people with a complicated daughter. I got out. The older man noticed me halfway up the driveway. He turned off the hose. "Can I help you?" "Sir, you don't know me." He looked cautious now. "Okay. My name is Nico Papadimitriou." Nothing. Then I said, "I'm engaged to your daughter." The hose slipped out of his hand. Not dramatically. He just let go. Water ran across the concrete. He stared at me. "Megan?" "Yes." His face changed. And that was the first moment I understood I had been prepared for the wrong reaction. There was no anger. No suspicion. No outrage that I'd shown up uninvited. Relief hit him so hard that it almost folded him. His eyes filled. He looked toward the house. "Nancy." His voice cracked. "Nancy, come outside." The front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch. She looked at me, then at her husband, then back at me. Gerald pointed. "This is Megan's fiancé." Nancy put one hand over her mouth. That was the moment the story changed. Completely. 5 minutes earlier, I had been worried these people might not approve of me. Now I was standing in their driveway watching two parents react like somebody had just told them their missing daughter was alive. They invited me inside. The house was exactly what the outside suggested. Clean, comfortable, modest, family pictures everywhere. And Megan was in almost all of them. School photographs, Halloween costumes, birthday cakes, high school graduation, prom, college. On the mantel sat a photograph from the University of Michigan. Megan in cap and gown, Gerald beside her, Nancy on the other side. Both of them smiling with the kind of pride parents don't know how to hide. I looked at that picture longer than I should have. This was the daughter who had told me she needed to erase her family just to breathe. Nancy brought coffee. I hadn't asked for any. Then she put cookies on the table even though nobody touched them. Her hands shook the entire time. Gerald sat across from me. For a while, none of us knew where to begin. Eventually, I did. "Megan told me you haven't had a relationship for a long time." Nancy looked down. 2 years. She told me things were difficult growing up. Gerald's eyebrows moved. "What kind of things?" "Controlling." Nancy looked at him. Critical. Neither spoke. She said she needed distance. Gerald leaned back. I suppose that's one way to describe it. His voice wasn't angry. That bothered me more. What happened? The answer came slowly. Gerald had worked for the Postal Service for more than 30 years. Nancy had spent most of her career working as a school secretary. They weren't rich. They weren't poor. They saved. They paid bills. They put Megan through college. Every tuition payment. Every semester. No loans dumped onto her. No heroic speech about it. They were simply proud that they'd managed to do it. Then Megan moved to Detroit. At first, everything stayed normal. Calls, visits, holidays. Then, slowly, she became harder to reach. Phone calls shortened. Weekend visits became excuses. Then she stopped coming home. Nancy noticed that Megan had started using a different last name online. Ashford, her middle name. Photos appeared from corporate events, fundraisers, restaurants, gala dinners, people Gerald and Nancy had never met. A version of their daughter that looked familiar and foreign at the same time. Gerald rubbed his hands together. Then she got serious about getting married. I leaned forward. She told you about me? No. That hit me. She never mentioned me? Not your name. Nancy answered. Not once. Gerald continued. She said she was planning a wedding. What happened? He looked toward Nancy, then back at me. She asked us for $100,000. I thought I'd misheard him. For the wedding? He nodded. 100,000. What did you say? Gerald's face tightened. I told her we couldn't do it. He looked embarrassed saying it, as if not having $100,000 available for a wedding was some personal failure. We offered 15. Nancy added quietly. 15,000. That was everything we felt we could give without damaging our retirement. Gerald nodded. We wanted to help. What did Megan say? Nancy stared at her coffee. Then Gerald answered. She told us if we couldn't invest in her future, we didn't belong in it. I said nothing. That night she blocked our numbers. Nancy stood. She walked into another room. When she returned, she was holding an envelope. She placed it in front of me. Birthday card, still sealed. Across the front, in red ink, return to sender. I picked it up, then noticed the address label. The return address was ours. Megan's handwriting. Something inside me shifted. I reached for my phone, because there was one more thing. A message Megan had sent me the night before. The message that had pushed me into making this trip. I opened it, read it once, then turned the phone toward them. Babe, great news. I finally reached out to my parents. They apologized for everything. They really want to meet you. They can do lunch tomorrow before they leave town. I'm so happy you're finally going to meet them. Nobody spoke. Nancy read it, then put my phone down carefully. Gerald looked through the kitchen window toward the flowers he'd been watering when I arrived. I sat there trying to understand what I was looking at. Megan had texted me that her parents had apologized. At the exact same time, I was sitting across from those parents. Parents who hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Parents who had no idea she was engaged. Parents who had no idea I existed. So who exactly was I supposed to meet for lunch? That question changed everything. I thought about the entire drive north. All the anxiety. All those ridiculous rehearsed introductions. The fear that Megan's parents would see some loud Greek real estate guy from Detroit and decide I wasn't refined enough for their daughter. And here they were. Maple Avenue. Gardenhose. Wind chimes. Returned birthday cards. Nothing intimidating about them. Nothing remotely ashamed of where they came from. Then the truth hit me. They weren't the ones embarrassed by someone. Megan was. She had been embarrassed by them. That realization did something to me. The man who had driven north that morning, worried about making a good impression, disappeared somewhere inside that kitchen. The man who drove back to Detroit wasn't worried about being accepted anymore. He was wondering how much of his relationship had been real. I didn't confront Megan when I got home. That's important. Because confronting somebody the second you discover a lie feels satisfying. It also tells them exactly how much you know. My father had taught me something years earlier. Nico, if you interrupt a liar halfway through, all you get is another argument. Then he'd tap his finger on the table. Let him finish. Once the whole lie is on the table, it becomes evidence. So when I pulled into the parking garage a little after 2, I stayed in the car. 10 minutes, maybe longer. Then I made a decision. Not yet. I rode the elevator upstairs. Stood outside our door. I could hear the television. Megan moving around inside. Completely normal. Completely unaware. I unlocked the door. She was sitting on the couch. Laptop open. Glass of white wine on the table. Wedding venue photos on the screen. She looked up and smiled. That same smile. Warm. Effortless. How was the property? Promising. I put my keys down. Long drive. You look exhausted. She closed one browser tab. Want me to order dinner? For 1 second, the sentence I actually wanted to say almost came out. I want you to tell me why your mother's unopened birthday card is sitting in a house in Saginaw while you're telling me she apologized to you. Instead, I said, sure. Megan leaned against my shoulder. What are you in the mood for? I don't care. She went back to scrolling. I sat beside her, perfectly calm on the outside. Inside, I was taking our entire relationship apart piece by piece. That night, after Megan fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling. I treated the problem the same way I'd treat a complicated real estate deal. Facts first, assumptions second. What did I actually know? Her legal name was Megan Bennett. Her parents were Gerald and Nancy Bennett. They lived in Saginaw. They were alive. They were not absent. They missed their daughter desperately. They had paid for her college. They had offered $15,000 toward her wedding. She had demanded $100,000. When they couldn't give it, she cut them out. Those were facts. Another fact. While I was physically sitting in Gerald and Nancy Bennett's kitchen, Megan had sent me a message saying those same people had apologized to her and wanted to meet me the next day. That meant the lie wasn't finished. She was building towards something, which meant somebody was supposed to appear at that lunch. Who? I fell asleep, thinking about that question. Over the next few days, I didn't snoop, didn't touch her phone, didn't follow her, didn't question her directly. I just listened differently. Once you discover that somebody has been speaking to you on 2 levels, every ordinary conversation changes. That's when I noticed the Callahans. Robert Callahan, Vivian Callahan. I'd heard the names before. I simply hadn't realized how often. Robert thinks the Henderson account might close early. Casual. Vivian was at that fundraiser. Casual. Robert said his wife loves that restaurant. Casual. Little references, dropped into conversations weeks apart. At the time, they meant nothing. Now, they looked like preparation. Megan had been making those names familiar to me, softening them, making sure that if Robert and Vivian Callahan suddenly became important, I wouldn't ask why I'd never heard of them. The following Tuesday, I closed my office door. Then I looked up Robert Callahan, Senior Vice President at Megan's company, Wealth Management, downtown Detroit. Late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of headshot that somehow communicates. I've never once worried whether my credit card would be declined. Then Vivian, a charity gala photograph from a couple of years earlier. Polished, perfect hair, perfect dress, society column smile. Together, they looked exactly like what somebody might invent if they were embarrassed by a retired postal worker and a school secretary from Saginaw. I leaned back in my chair. There they were, the people I suspected Megan intended to introduce as her parents. And for the first time, I understood the lie emotionally. Megan hadn't just hidden Gerald and Nancy. She had rebuilt herself. Ashford instead of Bennett. Detroit instead of Saginaw. Corporate circles instead of Maple Avenue. Polished dinners instead of wind chimes and a garden hose. For years, she'd climbed into a version of herself that looked expensive enough to satisfy whatever insecurity lived inside her. And somewhere along the way, her real parents stopped fitting the image. Gerald refusing to destroy his retirement for a 6-figure wedding wasn't simply a disagreement about money. To Megan, it threatened the illusion. The life she'd created required a certain story, a certain family, a certain background, and Gerald and Nancy Bennett were painfully ordinary, which apparently had become unforgivable. I stared at Robert Callahan's photograph, then Vivian's, and one question remained. How far was Megan willing to take this? The more I thought about it, the worse it became, because Megan hadn't simply stopped speaking to her parents. That wouldn't have been enough. If she wanted Megan Bennett of Saginaw to disappear and Megan Ashford of downtown Detroit to take her place, Gerald and Nancy couldn't just be distant. They had to be erased. And once I understood that, another question started bothering me. What had she told Robert and Vivian Callahan? People like the Callahans didn't build careers and reputations by casually agreeing to bizarre favors. Robert was a senior executive at a wealth management firm. Vivian appeared regularly at charity events. They had professional circles, social standing, people who knew them. Megan couldn't simply walk into Robert's office and say, "Would you mind pretending to be my father?" There had to be a story, a good one, something emotional enough to make intelligent people stop asking obvious questions. Maybe she told them Gerald was abusive. Maybe she told them Nancy had abandoned her. Maybe she said her real parents refused to attend because they hated me. I didn't know, and that bothered me, because every lie Megan told me required another lie told to somebody else. At some point, the architecture had to become enormous. 2 days later, I learned exactly when the next performance would happen. Thursday morning, my phone buzzed. Shared calendar notification. Megan had added an event. Saturday, 12:32 p.m. The Lark, West Bloomfield. Lunch, Robert and Vivian. Underneath she'd written, "Can't wait for you to finally meet them, babe." This means everything to me. I stared at those words. This means everything to me. Then I saw Nancy's hands pushing that unopened birthday card toward me. Gerald standing in his driveway, while water ran from the hose he'd dropped. Two people who hadn't heard their daughter's voice in 2 years. Yeah, I said it quietly to nobody. I imagine it does. That afternoon I called my father from the parking garage beneath my office. He answered almost immediately. "Nico, I need to talk to you." Something in my voice must have told him not to ask questions. Come home. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table. The same table where Megan had eaten my mother's food. The same table where Uncle Theo had finally asked the question everybody else had been avoiding. "Where are your people?" Now I knew. So I told my father everything. Saginaw, Gerald, Nancy, the $100,000 wedding request, the returned birthday card, Megan's fake text, Robert Callahan, Vivian Callahan, Saturday's lunch. My father never interrupted. Not once. That was how I knew he was angry. When I finished, he kept his hands folded on the table. Then he asked, "What do you need?" "No lecture. No satisfaction. No. I told you something was wrong." Just 4 words. "What do you need?" "I need to go to the lunch." He nodded. "But I don't want to confront her there." "Good. I want her to finish it." Another nod. "And after that?" I leaned back. "I want a dinner." My father studied me. "What kind of dinner?" "A real one." I looked at him, with everybody who actually belongs in the room. He understood immediately. "The Bennetts? I'm going back to Saginaw." "You think they'll come?" "I don't know." "And the Callahans?" "They'll be invited." My father's mouth tightened. "Megan?" "Especially Megan." Silence. Then he stood. "I'll speak to your mother about the restaurant." That was it. At least from him. My mother had apparently been standing in the living room listening to most of the conversation. In our family, that's technically not eavesdropping. It's proximity. She walked into the kitchen with her arms folded. I knew that look. I'd seen versions of it when I was 14. Nico. Ma. She ate my spanakopita. Of everything I'd just explained, apparently this was the betrayal that offended her personally. I know. In my house, I remember. She sat at this table. Yes. Smiled at me. Ma. And meanwhile, her mother is sitting in Saginaw, sending birthday cards that come back unopened. Her eyes were shining now. That stopped being funny. I know. My mother went quiet. Then she walked around the table, put both hands on my face. She had been doing that since I was a child whenever she wanted to make, absolutely certain I heard her. You fix this. Her voice was soft. Not only for yourself. She looked straight into my eyes. For those parents too. Saturday arrived. The Lark in West Bloomfield was exactly the kind of restaurant Megan would choose for this. Dark wood, soft lighting, quiet money. A dining room designed so everybody inside looked more successful than when they walked through the door. I arrived early. 5 minutes. Enough to choose my seat. I faced the entrance. At 12:30, Megan appeared. Robert Callahan on one side, Vivian on the other. For half a second, I almost admired the visual. Megan looked radiant. Robert wore confidence the way some men wear cologne. Vivian was polished without looking like she'd tried. And Megan had linked her arm through Robert's as they walked toward me, like she'd done it 1,000 times. I stood. Megan smiled. Nico. Then she turned proudly. I want you to finally meet my dad, Robert. Dad. She actually said it. And my mom, Vivian. Robert extended his hand. Nico. I shook it. Sir. Then Vivian. I'm so happy to meet you. You too. I looked at both of them. I've heard so much. That was technically true. Just not from Megan. We sat down. Menus opened. Water arrived. And for the next 20 minutes, I watched 3 people perform a family. It was extraordinary. Megan laughed at Robert's jokes, slightly too quickly. Vivian referenced childhood memories carefully. A vacation. A restaurant Megan supposedly loved growing up. A family Christmas. Every story had just enough detail to sound real, and just little enough detail to avoid becoming dangerous. Vivian was good. But every now and then Megan would say something, and Vivian's eyes would shift for half a second, like an actor waiting for the next line. Robert was much better. He asked me about commercial real estate, mentioned Detroit development, asked intelligent questions about interest rates and occupancy. He had clearly researched me. Under different circumstances, I probably would have liked him. That was the strange part. Maybe Robert and Vivian believed whatever Megan had told them. Maybe, in their version of the story, they were helping a younger woman whose terrible parents had abandoned her. That possibility mattered. So I kept my anger where it belonged, with Megan. For now, I cut into my fish, smiled, asked questions. Then I looked at Robert. Megan's told me how important you've been in her life. He smiled. She's been like family to us. Like family, not family. Interesting choice. That means a lot. I looked directly at Megan. She practically glowed. Then I leaned forward slightly. There was one thing I should probably explain about my family. Robert listened. We're traditional. Megan smiled. She knew this speech. Greek traditional. Vivian laughed softly. I've heard. My parents take family occasions very seriously. I can imagine. So, I'd like to do something before the wedding. Megan turned toward me. What? An engagement dinner. Her eyebrows lifted. I kept going. Next Saturday. Family. Good food. A few toasts. I looked at Robert and Vivian. My parents would really like the opportunity to formally welcome Megan's family before we're standing in church. There it was. A tiny pause. Robert glanced at Vivian. Not long. Maybe half a second. But it existed. Calculation. Then Robert smiled. We'd be honored. Megan grabbed my hand under the table. Hard. Her face lit up. Really? Of course. She squeezed my fingers. Nico, that's perfect. I thought you'd like it. She looked at Robert, then Vivian, then back at me, and I saw something I hadn't recognized before. Victory. Megan believed the final loose end had just tied itself. Her invented parents were about to meet my real parents. Once they survived that dinner, there would be nothing left between her and the wedding. I smiled back at her. She had no idea that by agreeing to the dinner, she'd just walked deeper into the only trap I'd ever built in my life. Monday morning, I drove back to Saginaw. This time, Gerald was waiting. I called from the driveway. Before I even reached the porch, the front door opened. Nico. Hey, Gerald. Nancy was already putting coffee on. Sam table. Same kitchen. Different conversation. I told him everything about the lunch. Robert, Vivian, the introductions, the fake memories, the engagement dinner. Nancy went still. She actually introduced them as us? I nodded. As her parents. Gerald looked down. His jaw worked once, then stopped. Nancy stared into her coffee. We don't want to cause a scene. I know. We don't want to embarrass her. I know. She's still our daughter. That one hurt. I leaned forward. Nancy. She looked at me. My mother is going to stand in a church and welcome Megan into our family. I paused. She deserves to know who Megan actually comes from. Nancy's eyes filled. And you two have spent 2 years sending cards to someone who wouldn't even open them. I let that sit. You deserve to be in that room. Gerald looked at me. What do you expect us to say? Nothing. He frowned. Nothing? You don't have to confront her. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to sit down if you don't want to. I looked from Gerald to Nancy. You just need to walk through the door. Nancy swallowed. Why? Because Megan has spent years telling everybody that you don't exist. I kept my voice low. The truth doesn't need a speech. It just needs to arrive. Gerald reached across the table, covered his wife's hand. They looked at each other. A long conversation happened between them, without either one saying anything. Then Gerald turned back to me. What time? Tuesday evening. I met with my father and Uncle Theo in my father's home office. My father listened to the plan, asked 2 questions. Précise, honest, entrance, timing, then nodded. I'll handle the restaurant. Theo had a different reaction. I should be at the door. No. Nico. No. I only want to say one thing. That sentence is exactly why you're not saying anything. He frowned. She lied to your mother. I know. She lied to you. I know. She replaced your parents. Theo, I put both hands on his shoulders. I am asking you to accomplish the hardest thing you've ever attempted. He narrowed his eyes. What? Silence. He looked genuinely offended. Until when? Until I stand for the toast. Theo leaned back, looked toward the ceiling, then at my father. My father didn't help him. Finally, Theo sighed. Fine, then raised one finger. But I want 2 pieces of tirapita before dinner starts. Done. And if we leave early, I'm holding the door. I nodded. You can hold every door in Detroit. That satisfied him. By Thursday, everything was arranged. The restaurant was my father's choice. A Greek place downtown where he'd known the owner for years. Varm, unpretentious. The kind of restaurant that smelled like lemon, roasted meat, and bread before you fully crossed the doorway. Not a showroom. A family place. The private room in back was perfect. White tablecloths, candles, soft lighting. One long table. My mother took over the menu. Of course she did. She even placed a framed photograph of my grandparents near the entrance. They should be here. That was her entire explanation. Gerald and Nancy would drive down Saturday morning. They booked a hotel in Dearborn. Gerald called me Thursday night to confirm. We're set. You sure? No. He gave a tired laugh. But we're coming. Then his voice softened. Nico. Yeah? Whatever happened Saturday. He paused. Thank you for coming to our house. I didn't know what to say. He continued. For knocking. Another silence. She chose a good man. His voice cracked slightly. Even if she doesn't understand that yet. I stared at the wall. I'll see you Saturday, Gerald. Friday night, I pressed my suit. Megan slept beside me. Completely peaceful. I lay awake. I thought about Maple Avenue. A Detroit Tigers shirt. A Gardenhose. Nancy's unopened card. 2 parents sitting at a kitchen table for 2 years wondering whether their daughter would ever come back. Tomorrow, they were coming to her. The lie had spent years building walls. All I had to do was open a door. Saturday morning, I woke up strangely calm. Not happy. Not relaxed. Certain. Megan was already getting ready. Shower. Hair dryer. Closet doors. Makeup spread across the bathroom counter. The sounds of somebody preparing for an important evening. She had no idea how important. I thought about Gerald at the hotel, probably standing in front of a mirror, trying to make an old blazer sit correctly. Nancy checking her dress. Two people preparing to enter a room where their own daughter had replaced them. Get up, Nico. Let's finish it. Megan spent nearly 3 hours getting ready. I sat in the living room with sports highlights playing quietly. Twice she came out. First with earrings. These? Or the gold ones? Those. Then shoes. Black? Definitely. She studied herself in the mirror. You sure? You look beautiful. And she did. That had never been the problem. The problem was, everything beautiful had been built on top of. Around 5:30, she grabbed her coat. I want to get there early and make sure everything looks right. Go ahead. You're not coming? I've got one quick business call. She walked over, kissed my cheek. Don't be late. I won't. The door shut. Her footsteps disappeared down the hallway. I waited 5 seconds. Then called Gerald. He answered immediately. You good? We're ready. His voice was steady. Nancy? She's nervous. That's okay. We both are. When I text you, come inside. Right away? Right away. Doesn't matter what's happening. You open the door and walk into the room. Gerald was quiet. You don't need to say anything. I know. She'll see you immediately. I know. Gerald, I just want you ready for that. His answer stopped me. Nico. Yeah? I've been ready for 2 years. Silence. Since the night she blocked us. Another pause. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every time Nancy mailed something and it came back. His breath caught. We're ready. The line went dead. I held the phone for a few seconds. Then put it away. Put on my jacket. Checked my inside pocket. The engagement ring was still there. I wasn't sure why I'd brought it. Maybe because some endings deserve a physical object. Then I left. Saturday night at the restaurant felt exactly right. Varm. Bozu. The smell of garlic and lemon hit me before I reached the host stand. But the private dining room in the back was quieter, purposeful. My mother had been there since 4. Naturally, she was adjusting flowers when I walked in. She looked up, studied me. You okay? Yeah. Don't lie to your mother tonight. I almost smiled. I'm okay. She crossed the room, both hands on my face. Again. Your grandfather used to say something. Which thing? He said truth always finds the largest chair at the table. She straightened my collar. Even when nobody saves it a seat. I swallowed. She looked into my eyes. Let it sit down tonight. That almost broke me. Almost. My father was near the bar. Charcoal suit. Talking quietly with my cousin. He saw me. One nod. Everything is ready. Theo was at the side table. Eating. Of course. A plate stacked with tirapita in front of him. He pointed at the food. Then at me. His message was obvious. I fulfilled my obligation. Now you fulfill yours. I nodded. At exactly 7, I heard Megan before I saw her. That social laugh, slightly higher than her real laugh. The one she used when she wanted everyone around her to know she was having a wonderful time. The door opened. Megan entered first. Navy dress. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. Behind her came Robert. Silver hair. Expensive suit. Authority without effort. Vivian walked beside him. Pearls. Graceful posture. Flawless smile. The family Megan believed she deserved. She moved through the room beautifully. Kissed my mother on both cheeks. Greeted my father. Touched Vivian's arm while laughing. Introduced Robert to Theo. Theo deserves credit. He said absolutely nothing inappropriate. His face, however, committed several felonies. Then Megan reached me. Slipped her arm through mine. She leaned close. This is perfect. I looked around the room. It is. Your family is incredible. I know. She squeezed my arm. This is everything I wanted. I looked at her. That's why I arranged it. She heard romance. I meant logistics. Dinner began. Branzino. Lamb. Salads. Bread wrapped in cloth. Wine. The sounds of forks, glasses, laughter. A real family dinner. Robert handled himself perfectly. He spoke with my father about business. Asked intelligent questions. He seemed genuinely interested. Vivian complimented my mother on the restaurant. My mother smiled graciously. I would pay money to know what she was actually thinking. Megan relaxed more with every passing minute. That was what I needed. No suspicion. No fear. Let her believe the performance was working. I ate. I laughed. I refilled wine. I asked Robert about his career. I listened to Vivian tell my mother another invented story about Megan's childhood. And through all of it, my phone stayed face down inside my jacket. One message waiting to be sent. At 7:48, dinner reached a natural pause. The main plates had been cleared. Dessert hadn't arrived. Wine glasses were half full. Everyone was comfortable. Megan was laughing at something Robert had said. Perfect. I took out my phone beneath the table, opened Gerald's number, typed one word. Now. So? Then I stood, picked up a knife, tapped it gently against my glass. The clear sound traveled through the room. Conversation stopped. Megan looked up. Radiant. She thought she knew what was coming. A toast. Something about love. How lucky I was. Maybe a wedding story. I let the silence sit for one extra second. Then I smiled. I want to thank everybody for being here. My voice was calm. In my family, a dinner like this isn't just dinner. My father watched me. It's a statement. I looked around the table. When we bring people into a room like this, we're saying something. I paused. We're saying these people matter. Megan's smile grew. These people are real. Robert shifted slightly. Just slightly. And my father taught me that who you bring to your table tells people a lot about who you are. I let my eyes move around the room, then back to Megan. So before we go any further, I paused. I want to make sure we have the right people at the table. Megan's smile changed. Barely. Confusion. Not fear. Not yet. I looked toward the restaurant manager standing near the side wall. He knew. One nod. He walked toward the private entrance, reached for the handle, opened the door, and Gerald and Nancy Bennett stepped inside. Nobody moved. Gerald wore a navy blazer. Old, clean, slightly loose around the shoulders. The kind of jacket a man keeps for weddings, funerals, graduations, and days that matter. Nancy wore burgundy, small purse held between both hands. Her chin was raised. Her face was composed through force of will. They didn't look rich. They didn't look polished. They didn't look like Robert and Vivian Callahan. They looked like exactly what they were, Megan's parents. They walked into the room, and I didn't look at Gerald. I didn't look at Nancy. I didn't look at Robert. I watched Megan, because this entire night had been built for one thing. That face. The color disappeared first. Completely. Like somebody had pulled a plug. Her lips separated. Her eyes widened. The hand holding her wine glass stopped in midair. The glass started to tilt. Without taking my eyes off her, I reached down and steadied it. For the first time since I'd met Megan, she had absolutely no idea what came next. I took the wine glass from Megan's hand before it could spill, set it carefully on the white linen. She turned toward me, and I watched her mind start working. Fast. Desperately. I had seen that look across negotiation tables before. Someone realizes the deal has changed. The numbers no longer work. The exit they were counting on is suddenly gone. So they start searching for another one. A new explanation. A technicality. A different version of events. Anything that keeps them in control. Nico. Her voice was almost gone. Just air around my name. I didn't raise mine. I went to Saginaw. That stopped everything. Not only Megan. The entire table. Her eyes widened. I drove up there 3 weeks ago. She stared at me. I thought maybe I could do something good for you. Her lips parted. I honestly thought I might be able to repair whatever had happened between you and your parents. I glanced toward Gerald and Nancy, standing by the open door. I thought maybe bringing your family back into your life could be a wedding gift. Nobody moved. So I drove to Maple Avenue. Megan's face tightened, and I found your father outside. Gerald lowered his eyes briefly. Detroit Tigers shirt, reading glasses on his head, garden hose in his hand. I looked directly at Megan. I told him I was marrying his daughter. A poser. He dropped the hose. Nancy pressed her lips together. Megan whispered, "Nico, you don't understand. I understand more than you think." I kept my voice level. "Your father spent 31 years working for the Postal Service." Megan went still. "Your mother spent most of your childhood working in a school." Nancy's eyes were already shining. "They saved enough money to put you through the University of Michigan without leaving you buried in debt." I let the words settle. "They were proud of that." Gerald looked away. "They were proud of you." Megan shook her head slightly. "You don't know everything." "No." I nodded. "I know what they told me. And I know what I saw." I stepped a little closer to the table. "When you started talking about a wedding, you asked them for $100,000. A murmur moved around the room. Megan's face flushed. "They couldn't give you that. They offered $15,000. Money they would have taken out of what they'd saved for retirement." I watched her. "And when that wasn't enough for you, you told them that if they couldn't invest in your future, they didn't belong in it." Her jaw tightened. "That is not what happened. I sat in their kitchen, Megan. Quiet. Simple. Final. I saw the photographs." Her eyes flicked toward Gerald and Nancy. "School pictures. Birthdays. Graduation. You standing between the two people you spent the last year telling me were monsters. Pictures don't prove anything." "No, they don't." I agreed immediately. That seemed to surprise her. "But this does." I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. "I held a birthday card your mother mailed you." Nancy closed her eyes. "Still sealed." I looked at Megan. "Returned to sender." With our address on it. Now Robert was watching Megan differently. Vivian, too. And while I was sitting at that kitchen table, I paused. "You texted me." Megan's breathing changed. "You told me your parents had finally apologized." No one moved. "You told me they wanted to meet me for lunch." I turned slightly, toward Robert and Vivian. The problem was, I looked back at Megan. Your parents were sitting directly across from me when the message arrived. That landed hard. Vivian's hands flattened against the table. Robert's face became completely unreadable. Megan looked from them to me. "Nico." I turned to Robert first. Then, "Vivian. And I owe both of you something." Robert's expression tightened. An explanation. Vivian didn't speak. "I know what Megan told you." That got their attention. Robert looked directly at her. Then at me. "She told you her real parents were gone." Vivian's face drained. I continued. "That she had no family who could stand beside her." Megan interrupted. "Stop." I didn't. "She told you my family was extremely traditional, judgmental, probably intimidating." I looked toward my mother. My mother said nothing, which required more restraint than almost anything she'd ever done in her life. "And she asked you to step in." I looked at Vivian, not as strangers, not exactly, as the people who had become like parents to her. Vivian stared at Megan. I could see the realization forming. Slowly, painfully. Robert's jaw tightened. I continued. "She needed two respectable people at the table." I gestured gently toward them. People with the right careers, the right image, the right social standing. Then I looked toward Gerald and Nancy. Because her actual parents didn't match the story she wanted to tell about herself. Megan stood abruptly. "That's enough." My father shifted in his chair. Theo's head came up. I held up one hand. Not toward Megan, toward my family. "Stay seated." I looked at her. "No." She stared at me. "You've had 2 years to decide when enough was enough." I nodded toward her parents. They didn't get that choice. Vivian spoke for the first time. "Megan." One word. Megan turned toward her. The voice wasn't angry. That made it worse. "What exactly did you tell us?" Megan froze. Vivian continued. "You said they were dead." Nancy inhaled sharply. Robert closed his eyes for half a second. There it was. The missing piece. Even I hadn't known exactly how far Megan had gone until Vivian said it. Megan looked at her. "I said they were basically gone from my life." Vivian shook her head. "No." Her voice remained soft. "You told us your parents had passed away." Gerald's expression changed. Not anger. Something quieter. Like a man discovering there had been another level of grief below the one he already knew. Vivian looked toward Nancy, then Gerald. I'm so sorry. Nancy swallowed. You didn't know. No, we didn't. Robert finally spoke. Megan told us she had no one. His eyes stayed on her. She told us she was terrified of entering a large traditional family without anybody on her side. Megan's eyes filled. Robert, he held up a hand. Not cruelly, just finished. We agreed because we thought we were helping you. Vivian stared at her. We thought you were alone. I looked at Megan. That's what you did. I didn't need to shout. You turned their kindness into another piece of the lie. The room went completely still. Megan stopped looking around. That was when I knew she finally understood. There was no version left. No story she could tell me that Gerald and Nancy couldn't contradict. No story she could tell Gerald and Nancy that Robert and Vivian hadn't already heard differently. No story she could tell the Callahans that my family hadn't watched collapse in real time. She had built separate rooms for every lie. And tonight, I'd opened all the doors between them. I looked at her. For 14 months, I'd loved that woman. Maybe part of me still did. That's what people don't tell you about betrayal. Knowing someone lied doesn't automatically erase every breakfast, every joke, every quiet Sunday morning, every time they held your hand when you were tired. The memories don't vanish. They just change meaning. I thought about my father, about the way he'd built his business, about the way he treated everybody who worked for him. The leasing agent, the janitor, the guy parking cars at an event, the woman cleaning the office after dark. He didn't become respectful when somebody impressive walked into the room. Respect was the default. That was the standard he'd raised me with. I looked at Megan. My father taught me something before I understood why it mattered. She didn't answer. He taught me that how you treat someone doesn't depend on what they can do for you. I glanced toward Gerald. Not their job. Nancy. Not their address. Robert and Vivian. Not their connections. Then Megan. Not whether their life looks impressive enough in a photograph. My hand went inside my jacket. I felt the ring. I'd carried it into the restaurant without knowing exactly what I was going to do with it. Now I knew. By that standard, I took it out. I don't know who I'm supposed to be marrying. Megan stared at the ring. I placed it on the table. No throw. No dramatic gesture. Just metal against linen. A small sound. Almost nothing. But everybody heard it. Megan looked at me. Nico. I shook my head. No? The word came easier than I expected. I'm not doing this. Her eyes filled. We can talk. We've been talking for 14 months. You never asked me. Asked you what? My voice sharpened for the first time. Whether your parents were actually alive. She stopped. Whether Bennett was your real name. Whether you demanded $100,000 from your parents and cut them off when they couldn't pay it. Whether the people you were introducing to me as your mother and father had been recruited to play the part. Silence. Those aren't questions a fiancé is supposed to know he needs to ask. She stared at the ring. I looked away from her. Not because I hated her. Because I was finished. The floral centerpiece sat in the middle of the table. White flowers. Simple. My mother's choice. I picked it up, then walked toward Nancy. She watched me approach. Her mouth tightened. Her shoulders rose slightly with each breath. She had spent the entire evening holding herself together. Not for Megan. For herself. For Gerald. For dignity. I stopped in front of her. Held out the flowers. For you. Nancy stared at them. Then at me. Her face broke. Not dramatically. No scream. No collapse to the floor. It was quieter than that, which made it harder to watch. 2 years of birthdays. 2 years of returned envelopes. 2 years of wondering what she'd done wrong. 2 years of being erased by someone she had raised. It all seemed to reach her at once. She took the flowers and started crying. Gerald was beside her immediately, one arm round her shoulders, holding her close. His own eyes were wet, his jaw locked hard enough that I could see it. Then he looked at me, stepped forward, still holding Nancy with one arm, and extended his free hand. I took it. Gerald squeezed hard. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. There are thank yous, too big for language. That was one of them. When I released his hand, My father was standing beside me. I hadn't heard him move. That's my father. Stavros Papadimitriou doesn't announce himself when something matters. He simply appears where he's needed. He looked at Gerald, then held out his hand. I'm Stavros. Gerald shook it. My father continued. I should have met you months ago. He glanced toward me. Years ago, if things had been different. Then back to Gerald. I'm sorry we didn't. Gerald swallowed. Gerald. His voice was rough. Then he looked at me, back at my father. You raised a good man. My father turned toward me. Only for a second. I've seen that man proud before. When I graduated, when we closed our first major commercial deal together, when I bought my first building without his help, none of those looks were like this one. My mother didn't bother with a handshake. Of course she didn't. She walked directly toward Nancy, opened her arms, and pulled her into a hug. Immediate. Complete. The kind of embrace Greek mothers use when they've decided somebody belongs under their protection. Nancy held on. The white flowers trapped gently between them. My mother whispered something into her ear. I never asked what. Some things aren't for everybody. We started leaving. My parents, Gerald and Nancy. My cousin Nick, Theo, May. 2 families walking out of a room that should have introduced them under entirely different circumstances. My mother linked her arm through Nancy's. Gerald walked beside my father. Within 20 feet, the 2 of them had already fallen into that quiet conversation men sometimes have when neither needs to explain why the other understands. Theo came last. Of course. At the main door he stopped. I turned. So did he. For one last second, I looked back into the private room. Megan sat exactly where I'd left her. Perfect navy dress. Perfect hair. Perfect makeup. The ring rested on the tablecloth in front of her. The flowers were gone. That detail stayed with me. Robert and Vivian were standing near the opposite end of the room. Vivian already had her coat on. Robert rested one hand gently against her back. Neither looked toward Megan. Whatever loyalty she'd borrowed from them had ended the moment the truth arrived. Around the table were several of Megan's friends. People from the world she'd spent years building. Corporate friends. Fundraiser friends. The people who knew Megan Ashford. Not Megan Bennett. Nobody moved toward her. Nobody knew what to say. Because what exactly do you say when you discover the person you thought you knew had invented her own parents? There was no comforting version available. No misunderstanding to blame. No convenient villain somewhere off stage. Gerald and Nancy had walked into the room. That was enough. Megan sat there alone. For the first time perhaps without a role to play. Theo stared at her. I waited for him to say something. For once in his life, he didn't. He just shook his head. Not angrily. Almost sadly. Then he opened the door. And we walked outside. September air hit my face. Cool. Clean. Downtown Detroit kept moving around us. Cars. People laughing on the sidewalk. A couple walking toward another restaurant. Nobody knew what had just happened 10 yards behind that door. I stood there and breathed. My father came beside me. His hand went to the back of my neck. The same thing he'd done when I was 8 years old and nervous before a baseball game. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have done the same thing." That was all. Coming from him, it was enough. Across the sidewalk, Gerald had one arm around Nancy. She still held the flowers. They looked up at the Detroit skyline. 2 ordinary people from Saginaw standing underneath buildings Megan had apparently believed represented a better life than the one they'd given her. I looked at them, and I couldn't understand it. Not anymore. Gerald caught my eye. He nodded. It wasn't exactly gratitude. It wasn't congratulations. It was something between 2 men who had both lost something that night and understood the other one had too. I nodded back. Real estate teaches you to think about value. Purchase price, debt, equity, return. What something is worth today, what it might be worth 10 years from now. Most of my adult life had been spent negotiating numbers. That night taught me there are deals that don't belong on a spreadsheet. Some deals make you money. Some deals cost you money. And some deals you walk away from because whatever profit they promise isn't worth the person you'd have to become to accept them. That Saturday night, I walked away from the biggest commitment of my life. No wedding, no marriage, no future I'd spent 14 months imagining. And somehow, standing on that sidewalk, I knew I'd made the most important deal I'd ever make. I didn't earn a dollar. I just refused to spend the rest of my life pretending a lie was valuable because it looked expensive. Megan had spent years trying to erase the parts of herself she thought weren't impressive enough. Bennett, Saginov, a postal worker father, a school secretary mother, a ranch house, wind chimes, birthday cards. She kept erasing until eventually there wasn't much truth left underneath the image. Then she built Megan Ashford on top of it. Career, apartment, clothes, events, the right friends, and finally, the right parents. Floor after floor, story after story, until the building looked perfect. The problem with building on an erasure is that nothing underneath it can carry the weight forever. All it took was one Saturday night, one open door, and two ordinary people walking through it. Gerald Bennett in an old Navy blazer. Nancy Bennett holding a small purse with both hands. Her real parents. No speech required. The moment they entered that room, every floor Megan had constructed started coming down. Not because I destroyed her life. I didn't. I just put the right people at the same table. The truth did the rest.